There exists a kind of strength, not just in the body, but in the mind, that makes a person seem untouchable, as if no hardship could ever bend them. And today, we step into the story of a man who reached that level over 4 centuries ago, and how his path still shapes those who walk the quiet road of discipline and clarity, like the one we follow here on Wisdom Timeless Path. Have you ever met someone who simply doesn't break? Who moves through difficulty without hesitation, without fear, without the endless self-negotiation that stops others in their tracks? While the world is busy making excuses, they endure, calmly, relentlessly, and the world explains it away. They're lucky. They were born that way. They just know the right people. But what few dare to see is the truth. This kind of resilience isn't inherited, it's earned. It's the price of choosing discomfort over ease, silence over noise, and persistence over pity. Centuries ago, in the Tokugawa era of Japan, one man proved this truth again and again. He fought more than 60 duels and never lost. His name was Miyamoto Musashi. Yet what made him remarkable wasn't brute strength or speed, but a stillness of mind so sharp that hesitation simply couldn't exist within it. His movements weren't just skill, they were the expression of total inner control. Before his death, Musashi wrote down his philosophy in the Book of 5 Rings, a guide not to fighting others, but to mastering oneself. Within those pages lies the quiet blueprint of transformation, how to shape your mind and body into something that cannot be broken. But the secret wasn't in addition, it was in removal. Musashi didn't build strength by stacking more on top. He achieved it by stripping away everything that weakened him: distractions, pride, comfort, and noise. That is the way of true mastery, not to chase motivation, but to cut away everything that dulls your blade. What remains when the unnecessary is gone is focus, power, peace. And that is what we seek here on Wisdom Timeless Path. Not inspiration that fades with the day, but the kind of discipline that endures through silence, through struggle, through time itself. So ask yourself, what stands in your way right now? What weight do you need to release so your strength can finally rise? Because when you begin to walk this path, you'll discover that silence isn't emptiness. It's the forge where the strongest version of you is made. Chapter 1: The Awakening. The story I'm about to share begins with a man named Adrian, 32 years old, an engineer, husband, and father of 2. On paper, everything looked fine. A stable job, a quiet home, the routine most people would call normal. But beneath that layer of normalcy was a man quietly losing his grip on himself, not because life was unbearable, but because he no longer had the strength to face it. Adrian wasn't weak in the way people usually imagine. He wasn't frail or incapable. His weakness was quieter, more deceptive. It lived in his habits, in the small decisions he postponed, in the silent excuses he whispered to himself each morning. Every Sunday night he made promises. This week will be different. Every Monday morning he broke them. He had bought 3 gym memberships in the past 2 years, canceled all 3. He downloaded fitness apps, followed motivational pages, even bought supplements that expired unopened in his cabinet. He started diets that collapsed before midweek. He planned to wake up early, but every alarm became a negotiation. 5 more minutes, 10, 20. By the time he got up, his willpower had already lost its first battle of the day. That same weakness followed him everywhere. At work, when problems demanded courage, he froze. He knew the answers, but couldn't speak them. In meetings, his silence grew louder than his words. At home, when his wife tried to have difficult conversations about money or their marriage, he changed the subject. When his children tested boundaries, needing guidance and discipline, he deferred to her, telling himself it wasn't the right time. He was reacting to life, never leading it, a man slowly dissolving into the background of his own story. Then one afternoon, everything cracked. During an important meeting with his boss, Adrian felt something strange. His chest tightened, his vision blurred, his hands trembled uncontrollably. The more he tried to hide it, the worse it got. His breathing shortened, his pulse raced, and before he knew it, he was gasping for air in front of everyone. He excused himself, stumbled out of the room, and spent the next 10 minutes in the restroom, shaking, drenched in sweat, convinced he was having a heart attack. But the hospital results told a different story. Physically, he was fine. His blood pressure, his heart, his oxygen, all normal. The doctor looked at him carefully and said, "Your body is reacting to threats that don't exist. Your mind can't tell the difference between danger and discomfort because it's never been trained to." Then the doctor paused, and with a tone that felt heavier than any diagnosis added, "You don't need medication. You need training for your nervous system, your mind, your discipline." That sentence hit Adrian harder than the panic attack itself. He realized that while he had spent years learning to fix machines, manage projects, and meet deadlines, he had never learned how to manage himself. He had built a career, a family, a house, but not a mind strong enough to carry them. That night, unable to sleep, he sat at his desk scrolling through articles, books, and lectures about mental toughness. He searched for answers on psychology, neuroscience, even meditation. But what finally caught his attention wasn't a self-help book. It was the story of a warrior who lived more than 400 years ago, Miyamoto Musashi. The more Adrian read, the more he realized that Musashi wasn't just a swordsman. He was an architect of the mind. His book, The Book of Five Rings, wasn't a collection of poetic reflections. It was a manual, a guide for mastering both inner and outer warfare. Every principle in it spoke directly to the struggle Adrian was facing. The fight not against enemies, but against hesitation, fear, and self-betrayal. And as the night turned to morning, Adrian understood something profound, that his awakening had just begun. Not in a gym, not in an office, but within the silent war between who he was and who he needed to become. At some point in life, we all reach that same quiet breaking point, the moment when exhaustion is no longer physical, but spiritual. When we realize the real battle has never been against the world, but against the soft habits and quiet hesitations that have lived inside us for years. Because weakness doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in through small excuses. "I'll start tomorrow. I'm too tired. It's not the right time." And by the time we notice, it's already built a home inside us. The truth is, most people don't lose because they're not capable. They lose because they surrender in small, invisible ways, long before the world ever asks them to fight. Strength isn't a reward for the chosen few. It's a decision, a relentless one, to face the discomfort that most people run from. It's the ability to stay when the mind screams to leave, to rise when no one's watching, to demand more from yourself even when no one expects it. And when that shift happens, when you stop chasing motivation and start confronting what weakens you, something changes. Life doesn't get easier, but it becomes clearer. You stop reacting and start choosing. You stop surviving and start leading. That's the moment of awakening, the one that separates who you've been from who you're meant to become. Not through noise or achievement, but through the quiet realization that strength isn't built in a gym or a battlefield. It's built in the mind, in silence, every time you refuse to give up on yourself. The first lesson that caught his attention in the Book of Five Rings seemed to make no sense at all. It read, "Have no preferences." At first, Adrian couldn't understand it. How could someone grow stronger without preference? How could mastery exist without attachment to one specific skill, tool, or style? To him, it sounded like indifference, like trying to succeed without direction. But as he read deeper into Musashi's explanation, the meaning began to strike him in a way he hadn't expected. Musashi's message wasn't about being careless. It was about becoming unshakable. To have no preferences meant never letting your strength depend on things you cannot control. If you can only train when the gym is open, you're not disciplined, you're dependent. If you can only stay calm when the world is quiet, you're not peaceful, you're fragile. True mastery, Musashi said, is the ability to act effectively in any condition. He went on to explain, do not depend on any particular weapon. And in that moment, Adrian began to understand. The greatest warrior isn't the one who masters a single blade, but the one who remains effective no matter what he holds in his hands, or if he holds nothing at all. Musashi had practiced with wooden swords, metal swords, 2 swords, 1 sword, and sometimes with no sword at all. He trained in daylight and darkness, under the burning sun and in freezing rain, in the quiet of dawn and the noise of the marketplace. Because life and the enemy never waits for your readiness. As Adrian reflected, he realized how far his own habits were from that kind of strength. He could only think clearly at his office desk. He could only work out when he felt well rested. He could only eat healthy when someone else had prepared the food. His so-called discipline depended on everything being just right. His routines weren't built on willpower, they were built on convenience. So he decided to begin again, differently this time. He would follow Musashi's principle and strip away the dependencies. No equipment, no ideal setup, no perfect timing, just effort, just presence. He chose something simple, push-ups, 20 a day. No matter where he was, no matter what time it was, no matter how he felt. The first week passed easily. The second week brought the soreness, the fatigue, the quiet resistance whispering in his mind. By the third week, travel interrupted his rhythm. Late flights, hotel rooms, long meetings. Then came the fourth week, and with it, the flu. This was the stage where Adrian would always stop in the past, but not this time. He remembered Musashi's rule. Practice must continue regardless of circumstances. So, he adapted, 10 push-ups instead of 20. 5 when his body was weak, but never 0. The goal wasn't perfection, it was consistency. It wasn't about intensity, it was about integrity. With each repetition, Adrian began to see the truth in Musashi's words. Real strength isn't the ability to perform when life feels easy. It's the ability to perform when everything feels wrong. Every push-up became a quiet declaration that his will was no longer tied to comfort, that he was learning to move forward without needing ideal conditions to do so. In time, the physical results mattered less than what was happening in his mind. The more he eliminated dependency, the more powerful he felt. Because when nothing external controls your ability to act, you become free. And that freedom is where unbreakable strength begins. What this story teaches us is simple, but it changes everything. Discipline is not built by perfect plans. It's built by motion in imperfect moments. The lesson isn't about push-ups or routines. It's about breaking the invisible habits that make us wait for ideal conditions before we act. Because the truth is, life rarely gives us the luxury of readiness. There will always be noise, fatigue, uncertainty, and distraction. But those who grow powerful are the ones who stop treating those things as excuses and start treating them as training. Every time we move forward when it's inconvenient, every time we stay committed when motivation fades, we are quietly rewriting the code of our mind. We're teaching ourselves that control doesn't come from order, it comes from adaptability. The more you eliminate what you think you need, the more you discover what you already have. And in that discovery, something profound happens. Strength stops being something you chase and becomes something you carry everywhere, in every condition, without asking the world to make it easier. That's the real lesson of elimination. It's not about doing without. It's about finally realizing you were never dependent to begin with. Chapter 2, The Principle of Elimination. The first lesson that caught his attention in the Book of Five Rings seemed to make no sense at all. It read, "Have no preferences." At first, Adrian couldn't understand it. How could someone grow stronger without preference? How could mastery exist without attachment to one specific skill, tool, or style? To him, it sounded like indifference, like trying to succeed without direction. But as he read deeper into Musashi's explanation, the meaning began to strike him in a way he hadn't expected. Musashi's message wasn't about being careless. It was about becoming unshakable. To have no preferences meant never letting your strength depend on things you cannot control. If you can only train when the gym is open, you're not disciplined, you're dependent. If you can only stay calm when the world is quiet, you're not peaceful, you're fragile. True mastery, Musashi said, is the ability to act effectively in any condition. He went on to explain, do not depend on any particular weapon. And in that moment, Adrian began to understand. The greatest warrior isn't the one who masters a single blade, but the one who remains effective no matter what he holds in his hands, or if he holds nothing at all. Musashi had practiced with wooden swords, metal swords, 2 swords, 1 sword, and sometimes with no sword at all. He trained in daylight and darkness, under the burning sun and in freezing rain, in the quiet of dawn and the noise of the marketplace, because life and the enemy never waits for your readiness. As Adrian reflected, he realized how far his own habits were from that kind of strength. He could only think clearly at his office desk. He could only work out when he felt well rested. He could only eat healthy when someone else had prepared the food. His so-called discipline depended on everything being just right. His routines weren't built on willpower, they were built on convenience. So he decided to begin again, differently this time. He would follow Musashi's principle and strip away the dependencies. No equipment, no ideal setup, no perfect timing, just effort, just presence. He chose something simple, push-ups, 20 a day, no matter where he was, no matter what time it was, no matter how he felt. The first week passed easily. The second week brought the soreness, the fatigue, the quiet resistance whispering in his mind. By the third week, travel interrupted his rhythm. Late flights, hotel rooms, long meetings. Then came the fourth week, and with it the flu. This was the stage where Adrian would always stop in the past. But not this time. He remembered Musashi's rule. Practice must continue regardless of circumstances. So he adapted. 10 push-ups instead of 20. 5 when his body was weak, but never 0. The goal wasn't perfection, it was consistency. It wasn't about intensity, it was about integrity. With each repetition, Adrian began to see the truth in Musashi's words. Real strength isn't the ability to perform when life feels easy, it's the ability to perform when everything feels wrong. Every push-up became a quiet declaration that his will was no longer tied to comfort, that he was learning to move forward without needing ideal conditions to do so. In time, the physical results mattered less than what was happening in his mind. The more he eliminated dependency, the more powerful he felt. Because when nothing external controls your ability to act, you become free. And that freedom is where unbreakable strength begins. Strength isn't built by perfect conditions. It's built by refusing to wait for them. When you can act in chaos as easily as in calm, you stop being controlled by circumstance. That's the quiet power of elimination. When nothing outside you decides what you can or cannot do. Chapter 3. Heijōshin, the still mind. By the 40th day of his practice, Adrian had transformed his body into a reliable machine. Push-ups no longer required thought. They had become as automatic as breathing. Yet his mind was still chaos. Beneath the rhythm of discipline, the same familiar storms remained. Anxiety over deadlines, fear of losing his job, worry about money, the quiet dread of disappointing the people he loved. His body was hardening, but his thoughts were fragile glass. One night, while revisiting the Book of Five Rings, a passage caught his attention, one that Musashi described as more vital than any sword technique. It was the concept of Heijōshin, the everyday mind, also translated as the mind that remains unchanged. Musashi wrote, "In the moment of combat, your mind should be no different than when you are drinking tea. No excitement, no fear, only presence." Adrian reread that line several times. How could that even be possible? How could someone remain calm while standing face to face with death? How could the mind be still when everything around it was chaos? The answer that followed was brutal in its simplicity. You train your mind not to react. Musashi's point was clear. Fear cannot be suppressed or ignored. It must be transcended. You don't silence emotion by force. You evolve into someone who no longer needs to react to it. Adrian decided to test the principle in his daily life. Whenever he felt tension rising, in traffic, during meetings, or in disagreements with his wife, he resisted his old pattern of reacting. Instead, he paused and observed. He took a slow breath and noticed what was happening inside him without trying to change it. My heart is racing. My hands are sweating. My jaw is tight. That's all. Just noticing. No judgment, no story, no escape. It sounded simple, but the practice was excruciating. His instincts screamed for release, to argue, defend, justify, run. But he forced himself to stay with the discomfort, as if holding his fear under a microscope. He realized how quickly the mind tries to control the uncontrollable, to fight thoughts instead of letting them pass. Then came the moment that changed everything. During a tense meeting at work, his boss, frustrated and short-tempered, began to raise his voice. The room fell silent. Normally, Adrian would freeze. His pulse would skyrocket, his palms would sweat, his voice would crumble. But this time, something different happened. He felt the familiar wave of fear rising, the tension in his chest, the heat in his face, and instead of fighting it, he watched it. He let it exist without reacting. The emotion came, peaked, and then dissolved. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, his words steady. No trembling, no avoidance, just presence. His boss looked startled. The team stared, waiting for the usual stammering defense. but it never came. Adrian had, for the first time, experienced Heijōshin, the still mind that remains unmoved by chaos. Later that night, he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. He hadn't controlled his fear. He had simply stopped feeding it. It was as if a switch had flipped. Fear was no longer the master, just another sensation that rose and fell like a passing wave. Modern science, he later discovered, supported this ancient truth. A neuroscientist from Stanford University, who had spent nearly 2 decades studying emotional regulation, explained it this way. When you practice non-reactive observation of your emotions, you're literally changing the structure of your brain. The amygdala, the region that triggers panic and fear, begins to rewire itself. Over time, the threshold for activation rises. What once caused anxiety becomes nothing more than awareness. That was the day Adrian finally understood what Musashi meant by the mind that does not move. It wasn't about emptiness. It wasn't about suppressing feeling. It was about power, the quiet kind, the ability to stay centered in a storm so fierce that everyone else is swept away. He realized that the greatest warrior isn't the one who conquers others, but the one who conquers his own reactions. And in that stillness, the mind stops being the battlefield and becomes the weapon itself. There comes a moment when you realize that calm isn't something the world gives you. It's something you build inside yourself. The storms don't stop. The noise doesn't fade. The pressure doesn't disappear. But within that chaos, a quiet space begins to form. A space that no one else can touch. That's the essence of a still mind. It doesn't fight emotion, it observes it. It doesn't resist fear. It lets fear rise and fall like a wave without losing balance. Most people spend their lives trying to control everything around them, but those who find real peace learn to control only one thing, their reaction. And when that happens, something shifts. The heart still beats fast, the world still moves fast, but you no longer do. You begin to see clearly, act deliberately, and live from a place that can't be shaken. That's when you understand what Musashi meant by the mind that doesn't move. Not a mind without feeling, but a mind that has learned to feel everything and still remain free. Chapter 4. Sen no Ri, the Way of the Warrior. Musashi once wrote that a calm mind without a capable body is only an illusion. You may master your emotions, but if your body collapses under pressure, the mind will eventually follow. The two are inseparable. One sustains the other. In his teachings, Musashi warned, train hard with wooden swords to strengthen the body. When the body is weak, the mind wavers. When the body is strong, the mind remains firm. Those words lingered in Adrian's thoughts long after he read them. He had been doing push-ups every day for 60 days, and while his form had improved, he knew his limits had not yet been tested. His body was stronger, yes, but not forged. Musashi hadn't trained for comfort. He trained for confrontation. He sought the edge and then pushed past it. So Adrian made a decision that felt reckless but necessary. 100 push-ups a day for 30 days. No excuses, no adjustments, no conditions. Whether it took him an hour or 3, whether he did them in one go or 10 sets, he would complete all 100 every single day. Day 1 nearly broke him. 45 minutes of grinding effort, arms trembling, breath short, muscles burning. The next morning, his body screamed in protest. Day 5, his shoulders ached so deeply that lifting a coffee mug felt like a challenge. His wife warned him he was pushing too hard, but Adrian wasn't chasing comfort anymore. He was chasing proof. By day 15, something began to change. The pain didn't fade, but his response to it did. The discomfort was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He did his 100 push-ups in 20 minutes, breathing through the fatigue instead of fighting it. By day 30, he could finish in 12 minutes. No pauses, no breaks, no hesitation. But the transformation wasn't just physical. It was psychological, spiritual even. Each repetition was no longer about endurance. It was about identity. Every day he finished what once seemed impossible, something fundamental shifted inside him. He stopped viewing effort as suffering and started seeing it as proof that the limits he once believed in were lies. That was the essence of Sen no Ri, the way of the warrior. Musashi's path was never about talent or speed or luck. It was about stripping away the illusion that effort has a limit. It was about understanding that mastery isn't measured by what you can do easily. It's measured by what you continue to do long after comfort has vanished. Adrian began to see how this principle extended beyond the floor, beyond training, into life itself. At work, when projects piled up and pressure mounted, he didn't crumble. When problems felt insurmountable, he didn't look for the easy way out. The same rhythm he had built into his body had started to guide his mind. Don't debate, just do. He realized that people spend most of their energy trying to negotiate with difficulty, trying to reason with it, delay it, soften it. But warriors don't negotiate with hardship. They enter it, adapt, and rise from within it. By the end of the 30 days, his arms were stronger, but his thoughts were stronger still. He understood now what Musashi had been teaching all along, that strength isn't a gift and discipline isn't a mood. They're forged through repetition, through sweat, through the quiet refusal to stop when the body says no. The way of the warrior, Sen no Ri, isn't about victory over others. It's victory over the voice that says you can't. And once that voice falls silent, there's nothing left to fear. The way of the warrior isn't about pushing harder. It's about breaking the belief that you can't. Once you prove to yourself that effort has no ceiling, struggle loses its power over you. The body obeys, the mind follows, and hesitation disappears. That's when strength stops being something you build and becomes something you are. Awareness is not something we turn on when needed. It's something we live inside of. The moment you stay present after action, when everyone else relaxes, you begin to see what they miss. Because life doesn't reward the one who finishes first. It rewards the one who stays awake. Zanshin is that quiet state of readiness where attention never fades and growth never stops. It's not about doing more. It's about never leaving the moment you're in. Chapter 5. Zanshin, Permanent Consciousness. By this stage, Adrian had built strength through relentless training and had learned to calm his mind through stillness. But Musashi's philosophy held a third lesson, one that separated ordinary fighters from masters. It was called Zanshin, a Japanese term meaning the mind that remains. At first glance, it sounded like vigilance, a kind of constant alertness. But Musashi's meaning was far deeper. Zanshin didn't mean being tense or paranoid. It meant living in continuous awareness, fully present in every moment, before, during, and after action. He wrote about warriors who won a duel only to be cut down while celebrating because they believed the battle was over too soon. Musashi warned, the fight does not end when your opponent falls. It ends when you are safe. Zanshin is the consciousness that does not relax until all is resolved. Adrian realized, with uncomfortable clarity, that he had been living the opposite way. He would finish a project at work and instantly switch off. He would complete a goal and then drift as if success were permission to stop paying attention. Each achievement became an excuse to lower his guard. Every victory followed by complacency. He began to see how that same pattern appeared everywhere. In his routines, his relationships, even his thoughts. He pushed himself hard, but always paused too early, mistaking completion for mastery. That's when Musashi's teaching began to echo in his mind. The battle doesn't end when the task is finished. It ends when awareness does not fade. So Adrian decided to train his awareness like he trained his body, deliberately, daily, without exception. After finishing his push-ups, instead of collapsing on the floor in relief, he would remain standing for 30 seconds, breathing deeply, feeling the fatigue without escaping it. After difficult meetings, instead of rushing to his phone or checking messages, he would sit for a full minute, eyes closed, quietly processing what had just unfolded, what he'd done well, what could be improved, what emotion lingered behind his decisions. It seemed trivial at first, almost pointless. But over time, something started to shift. He began noticing how awareness after action was where real learning lived. When he stayed present after an experience, the lesson integrated itself. But when he disconnected too soon, the opportunity dissolved. Within a few months, others began to notice the difference before he did. His coworkers started commenting, "You're different lately. You don't get rattled." His manager told him, half jokingly, "You must be meditating or something. Nothing shakes you anymore." Even his wife saw it most clearly. One evening, she looked at him and said softly, "You seem grounded, like you're finally here." And she was right. Something fundamental had changed. Adrian wasn't chasing calm anymore. He was living it. He no longer drifted from one moment to the next. He didn't let small victories make him careless or small setbacks make him spiral. His attention no longer scattered, it stayed. That was the essence of Zanshin, awareness that lingers after the moment has passed, consciousness that never fully withdraws. It's not tension, it's readiness, not fear, but presence. Musashi had understood something timeless. Most people lose not in action, but in what follows it. They celebrate too early, disengage too soon, or fall asleep in the brief silence after success. But those who live with Zanshin know that presence is not a state, it's a practice. Adrian's transformation was no longer about strength or calm. It had evolved into something rarer, complete consciousness, a mind that doesn't fade after the task is done, and a spirit that stays awake long after the noise has stopped. Awareness is not something we turn on when needed. It's something we live inside of. The moment you stay present after action, when everyone else relaxes, you begin to see what they miss. Because life doesn't reward the one who finishes first, it rewards the one who stays awake. Zanshin is that quiet state of readiness, where attention never fades and growth never stops. It's not about doing more, it's about never leaving the moment you're in. Chapter 6, Fudōshin, the mind that does not move. The true test came on day 105. By then, Adrian had been training daily, his body disciplined, his awareness sharp, his emotions steady. But life always finds a way to test what we think we've mastered. That morning, an unexpected message appeared in his inbox. Emergency meeting. Attendance mandatory. Within minutes, the whispers began. Budget cuts, restructuring, layoffs. As he sat down in the conference room, the air felt heavy. The kind of silence that arrives before bad news. His manager entered with a look that said everything before a word was spoken. Adrian, I'm sorry. The company's downsizing. Your position is being eliminated. The old version of him, the man from months ago, would have unraveled instantly. His heart would have raced, his palms would have sweat, his thoughts would have spiraled through every worst-case scenario. The mortgage, the kids, the future, the shame. But this time, something extraordinary happened. He felt the shock rise, a sharp pulse through his chest, and then it passed. No panic, no racing mind, no internal collapse, just stillness. He breathed once, fully, and said calmly, I understand. What's the timeline? His boss blinked, almost startled. You have 30 days. I'm really sorry. Okay, Adrian replied. Thank you for letting me know. And that was it. No resistance, no anger, no frantic rush to make sense of things. He walked back to his desk, opened his laptop, and continued working as if nothing had happened. Around him, others who had received the same news were breaking apart. Some were crying quietly. Some were calling home in a panic. Some sat frozen, staring at their screens. The storm had come for everyone, but only a few could stand in it. Adrian wasn't calm because he didn't care. He was calm because he had trained for this. For 105 days, he had been strengthening not only his body, but the invisible structure beneath it, his mind. He had practiced emotional control, presence, and non-reaction in hundreds of small battles. Traffic jams, arguments, fatigue, failure. Now, when the real storm hit, his roots held. Musashi called this state Fudōshin, the immovable mind. The mind that doesn't resist the wind but stands unshaken because its foundation is deep. Musashi once wrote, the tree is still not because the wind has stopped, but because its roots reach deep into the earth. Adrian finally understood what that meant. His stillness was not the absence of fear, it was mastery over it. He had felt discomfort so many times that it no longer controlled him. He had learned that peace is not the reward for calm conditions, it is the skill of staying composed in chaos. While others spent their days spiraling, Adrian spent his preparing. He updated his resume that same afternoon. He reached out to former colleagues, scheduled interviews, refined his portfolio. Within 3 weeks, he had 3 solid offers. By day 23, he signed a new contract, one that paid 40% more than his previous role. When he left his old company on the final day, he shook hands with his manager, smiled, and walked out with quiet confidence. No bitterness, no drama, just presence. 3 months later, some of his former co-workers were still unemployed. Many had fallen into frustration, resentment, and fear. They hadn't failed because they lacked skill. They had failed because they had never trained for uncertainty. A sports psychologist who had coached Olympic athletes for over 15 years explained it perfectly. The difference between those who perform under pressure and those who collapse isn't talent, it's exposure. The more time you spend deliberately facing discomfort, the higher your threshold becomes. Resilience isn't something you're born with, it's something you build, repetition by repetition. That was Fudōshin, the unshaken mind. The mind that no longer needs reassurance or control to stay steady. The mind that can stand in uncertainty and see it for what it is, just another form of movement in a world that never stops moving. And in that stillness, Adrian discovered something profound. Calm isn't the opposite of chaos. It's what remains when chaos no longer reaches you. True calm isn't found when life becomes easy. It's revealed when everything you counted on begins to fall apart. Most people wait for stability before acting, but those who master the unmoving mind learn to move through instability without breaking. Because strength isn't proven in peace, it's proven in pressure. And when you've trained your mind to stay still in the storm, you stop fearing what's coming. You simply face it, act, and rise. That is the quiet power of Fudōshin, when nothing outside of you has the authority to shake what's within you. Chapter 7, Hyōhō, the Strategy of Emptiness. Among all of Musashi's teachings, there was one principle that seemed to dissolve logic, subtle, quiet, and infinitely deep. It was called Hyōhō, the Strategy of Void. To most, it sounded abstract, almost mystical, but to those who understood, it was the final step, the bridge between mastery and effortlessness. Musashi wrote, "In combat, do not intend to win, intend not to lose." At first glance, it looked like a riddle. Winning and not losing seemed like the same thing. But as Adrian studied the line over and over, the difference began to reveal itself. When you fight to win, your focus narrows, your emotions rise, and you begin to overreach. You push too far, expose too much, and act out of desire rather than control. But when you fight not to lose, your energy stays centered. You preserve yourself, your timing, your awareness. You remain complete. That, Musashi said, is the path of the master, the art of moving without waste. Adrian decided to apply this principle to his new life. When he started his new job, he noticed how most people were obsessed with standing out, rushing to prove themselves, to show their intelligence, to be noticed. In that noise, mistakes multiplied. So he did the opposite. He focused not on shining, but on avoiding unnecessary errors. He showed up early. He finished what he started. He kept his word. He didn't compete for attention, didn't rush to speak, didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He aimed for precision, not performance. Months passed quietly, and then one afternoon, his manager called him in. "You know," the man said, "you're not the loudest voice in the room, but you're the one I trust the most. Others are talented, but you're reliable. And reliability beats brilliance every time." Adrian smiled, not out of pride, but understanding. That was Hyōhō. You don't need to dazzle the world. You just need to give it no reason to doubt you. The more he lived this way, the more the principle expanded beyond work. In his training, he stopped chasing records and simply refused to miss a single day. In his diet, he didn't aim for perfection. He just stopped feeding himself anything that weakened him. In his marriage, he didn't try to be the flawless husband. He simply became the consistent one. No drama, no extremes, no gaps, just quiet steadiness. That's what Musashi meant by void. Not emptiness as absence, but emptiness as purity, the space where nothing unnecessary remains. The warrior's mind, stripped of ego and impulse, becomes like still water, reflecting everything, attached to nothing. Adrian realized that most people lose not because they lack strength, but because they waste it. They chase after everything, respond to everything, try to prove everything. In doing so, they scatter their focus and drain their power. But when you remove that noise, when you stop trying to force victory, something remarkable happens. Clarity takes over, and success becomes inevitable. Hyōhō, Musashi said, is not the art of striking first. It's the art of never leaving yourself exposed. True mastery doesn't come from aggression, but from restraint, from patience, from the courage to move only when it matters most. And as Adrian carried this into every corner of his life, he discovered what Musashi had truly meant all along, that the highest level of strength isn't visible. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't need applause, and it doesn't need to win. It simply endures. That is the strategy of emptiness, where victory is not something you chase, but something you no longer need to seek. The highest form of strength isn't found in domination, it's found in restraint. When you no longer need to prove, compete, or chase, you begin to move with quiet precision. Nothing wasted, nothing forced. Because mastery isn't about winning, it's about leaving no space for defeat. Hyōhō teaches us that power lives in simplicity, in the calm refusal to overreach. When you stop trying to control every outcome, you stop creating weakness. And in that stillness, that disciplined emptiness, you realize that the void isn't empty at all. It's full of clarity, balance, and quiet power. Chapter 8. Sūtei, letting go of the self. 6 months after beginning his transformation, Adrian was no longer the same man. His body was stronger, his mind sharper, and his emotions steady as stone. The patterns that once controlled him had been replaced with clarity and discipline. Yet even in this new strength, a quiet fear still lingered. Not of failure, not of others, but of himself. It was subtle but relentless. A whisper that said, if you stop, even for one day, it will all fall apart. He feared losing the momentum that had built him. He feared that his strength was still fragile, that if he let go of control, everything would return to the way it was before. It wasn't weakness anymore. It was attachment disguised as discipline. Then, while revisiting Musashi's final writings, he encountered the last and most profound teaching, Sūtei, the act of abandoning the self. Musashi's final words were simple, almost haunting. I regret nothing. I fear nothing. I desire nothing. It wasn't indifference, it was liberation. Adrian asked himself, how does one reach such a state? How can you live without fear, regret, or desire when every part of being human seems built upon them? The answer Musashi offered was as radical as it was freeing. You stop identifying with outcomes. You stop measuring who you are by what you achieve. You stop needing to prove your worth through victories or validation. You stop chasing recognition and instead become the practice itself. Musashi wrote that the true warrior is not his sword, his battle, or his reputation. He is only the act of refinement. Adrian finally understood what that meant. He decided to test it. He stopped counting the number of days he had trained. He stopped tracking progress. He stopped posting his journey online for others to see. The training continued, but without ego, without witnesses, without applause. He meditated without expectation. He worked out without reward. He practiced discipline without the fear of losing what he'd gained. Because he finally understood the difference between having strength and being strong. If your strength depends on maintaining a streak, you'll always fear breaking it. But if your strength is who you've become, then no one and nothing can take it away from you. In that realization, something strange began to happen. The people around him started to shift. Colleagues who once joked about his routines grew silent around him. Friends stopped teasing him about his training. Even his family began to look at him differently. "You've changed," they said. "You're too serious now." But it wasn't seriousness they were reacting to. It was presence. When someone eliminates fear, hesitation, and the need for validation, they stop reflecting weakness. Instead, they become a mirror, and that mirror makes people uncomfortable. Because in your calm, they see their chaos. In your discipline, they see their excuses. Adrian didn't blame them. He understood now what Musashi had lived and died knowing. When you master yourself completely, you stop needing the world's approval. You become a quiet force, not trying to convince, not trying to prove, only existing in a way that exposes everything false around you. And while that kind of peace can make others uneasy, it is also the highest form of freedom. Because the end of the journey isn't power, it isn't success, it's surrender. The moment you no longer need control because you have finally become what you were trying to hold on to all along. That was the meaning of Sūtei, the letting go of self. The point where strength is no longer something you do, but something you are. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring, it means you stop clinging. After all the training, all the control, all the mastery, the final lesson isn't about tightening your grip, but loosening it. Because strength without surrender turns into tension, and discipline without detachment becomes fear in disguise. The mind that clings to what it's built will always live on the edge of collapse. Sūtei reminds us that freedom isn't achieved by gaining more. It's found when nothing owns you anymore. When effort no longer needs reward and progress no longer needs proof, you finally move through life weightless, grounded but free. Chapter 9. The Complete Transformation. A year after the journey began, Adrian was no longer recognizable, not because he had become someone new, but because he had stripped away everything that wasn't truly him. What remained was quiet, precise, powerful. He wasn't trying to live with discipline anymore. He had simply become the kind of person who could not live without it. Practice was no longer something he did. It was something he was. Musashi described this state with the phrase Kenzen Ichi. The sword and Zen are one. It means that there is no separation between who you are and what you practice. Meditation isn't an act, it's a state of being. Training isn't a task, it's your nature. The one who truly masters the path doesn't need reminders, motivation, or reward because the action has fused with identity. People would sometimes ask Adrian, "How do you have so much discipline?" He would smile and answer quietly, "I don't have discipline. I've removed the part of me that wanted to give up." That was the secret Musashi had been pointing toward all along. That strength, whether mental or physical, is not created by adding more. It's revealed by removing everything unnecessary. The goal was never to become extraordinary. It was to return to your essential nature, to the version of yourself untouched by laziness, fear, or doubt. You don't need to remind yourself to breathe. You don't need to force your heart to beat. They simply happen because they are part of who you are. And when your training, your focus, your consistency become as natural as those things, when practice merges with existence, you reach a level that no one can imitate. It's the level where others look at you and say, "That's not normal. That's not human." And they're right. Not because it's beyond humanity, but because it's humanity at its highest potential. Musashi lived his final years alone in a cave, writing what would become his last work, the Book of Five Rings. He owned no titles, no possessions, no followers. Yet he died with something greater than any reward, total mastery over himself. His final words were simple, "I regret nothing." How many people can say that? How many reach the end of their lives knowing they have lived to the edge of their capabilities, that they didn't waste their strength, their time, or their purpose? Most spend their lives negotiating with weakness, comforting themselves with excuses, numbing the discomfort that was meant to shape them. But Musashi didn't ask for comfort. He asked for truth. The kind of truth that only reveals itself when you faced your limits and refused to stop. And that is what Adrian's journey had become. A quiet proof that what Musashi taught centuries ago still lives in anyone willing to practice. The question is never, how did Musashi do it? The question is, why aren't we doing it? You have access to the same wisdom, the same hours in a day, the same body capable of transformation. The difference has never been ability, it's willingness. The willingness to remove dependencies. The willingness to practice until practice becomes identity. The willingness to let go of everything that isn't essential. Because this level of strength, the kind that unsettles others, the kind that makes ordinary people uncomfortable, isn't rare because it's impossible. It's rare because it's uncomfortable. Most people choose comfort over capability, distraction over depth, ease over endurance. But those who don't, those who endure discomfort long enough for it to become their nature, they find something no one else can touch. Adrian didn't need approval anymore. He didn't crave motivation. He didn't even fear failure. Because he finally understood that strength isn't a performance. It's a reflection of who you've become when everything unnecessary is gone. And if you've come this far, if you've stayed with this journey through every principle, every challenge, every test, you've already proven that you're not like most. The question now isn't whether you can change, it's what you'll do next. Will you keep seeking comfort, or will you start eliminating everything that makes you weak? Because the strength that scares others, the kind that makes people question what's possible, is the only strength worth having. The path is open. The teachings are clear. Now it's your move. If you've made it this far, thank you for your attention. This is Wisdom Timeless Path. See you in the next video.